sometimes people just want to be heard and know that you understand how they feel. I think one of the most important characteristics of a leader is that self-awareness, to know themselves and how their emotions feed into how they lead and how they interact with people, but also being aware enough to know who you're dealing with and why and what's important to them.
Hi, I'm Renata Bernardi, and this is the Job Hunting Podcast, where I interview experts and professionals and discuss issues that are important for job hunters and those who are working to advance their careers. So make sure that you subscribe and follow, and let's dive right in.
Nothing makes me happier than a well-prepared guest, somebody who reaches out to me with ideas and topics and a philosophy and a way of thinking that I think will strongly resonate with you, my listener. So welcome to the second episode of 2025 and the second interview for 2025, this time with an American recruiter, Linda Spearman-Scott. Now, I have interviewed Linda's colleague, Kyle Samuels, maybe a year or so ago, maybe less, I can't remember, but I will link that episode in the show notes because Kyle was an absolute pleasure to talk to as well. And we really hit it off. He was just so easy to interview. I didn't have too much to make a lot of effort to talk to him. He just had so many good, important things to say to you. And he recommended Linda. Linda reached out to me with lots of interesting topics and ideas that I thought were perfect to start 2025 with. So I interviewed her here overseas. You can see from my background, if you're watching this on YouTube, you know I'm not at my office yet. I've been away for 3 months. I'm going back to Australia soon. Probably by the time you're listening to this, I'll already be home, and that would be excellent. But this is a great episode for anybody, again, who is looking for work, obviously, who wants to understand how recruiters work, who wants to understand how HR works, human resources, because Linda spent a lot of her career working in human resources for major organizations in the US. And she has a very good grasp of the conflict between what candidates are trying to achieve with their careers and what employers want as talent, to bring in to their organizations and to retain. So that duality and that now her role as agent between these two forces, trying to find common ground is a really interesting conversation. Of course, we broaden the scope of our conversation and we address other topics, and I hope that resonates with you. I think it's important to remind you that you don't have to do this alone. I love that you're here and that you're listening to these episodes of the podcast and that they are helping you. I hope that they are. And that brings me such joy. I love to hear feedback and read reviews. So thank you for those of you who do take the time to give me a 5-star rating or send me a note. You make my day every day. So I am very, very grateful. But if you want more help, you can work with me. And my group coaching program is coming back. I only do this twice a year. Some people have asked me to do it more times. I don't know that I can because it's such an intense program. But if you want to join the next group coaching, it's coming up in a few weeks. So you can sign up for just register your interest. You don't have to sign up for it yet. Just register, join the wait list. There will be a link to it in the episode show notes. It's easy to find on my website. My website is my name, renatabernardi.com, and the program is called Job Hunting Made Simple. All my programs have very simple names and they mean exactly what they're supposed to mean. Job Hunting Made Simple. It's not Job Hunting Made Easy, but I promise you that I'm a dog with a bone when people sign up to work with me, and that I do my very, very best to simplify this and break this down for you so you're not overwhelmed and you're not tripping over all the tasks that you have to do and all the things that are happening to you when you're trying so hard to get a promotion or a new job or your career back on track or your career advanced. I will definitely love to work with you. Sign up for the waitlist. That's all I'm asking you to do. If you're interested in group coaching or if you're interested in working privately with me, have a look at my website and you can learn so much more about the services that I offer. Without further ado, here is Linda. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with her as much as I did.
I really like the fact that you reached out to me, because when I had a look at your profile and the things that you have done, it's such a good fit for the audience that we have, right? Most of my audience is in the US, even though I'm in Australia. So it's a really interesting situation for me. Half my clients are Americans as well. So it's really great when a person like you with such experience reaches out and we can then have a conversation here. And I'm the sort of host, I don't actually like to have conversations before we start recording, because I feel like sometimes we have such a great conversation offline and I want it to be recorded. So it's great to reach out to me and for us to do this organic chat. But what really interested me when you reached out is this some of the topics that you suggested, and especially the one about the changing management styles that we're seeing in 2024. Especially, I think now that it seems like we have crystallized the changes that happened during the pandemic, the style is definitely different. What are you observing where you are in terms of how management styles are changing now?
Well, I think some of the traditional management styles will continue to be important for the foreseeable future, but I think from an emphasis standpoint, that managers have to maybe sharpen some of those management skills that maybe prior to the pandemic, they could still be a good manager and get by without emphasizing some of those. I think communication is hugely important. I mean, it was so fascinating because at the time of the pandemic, I was working for a top three financial institution with probably close to 200,000 employees. And to see how so quickly they got everyone home and working from home. And nobody left that day. I think it was March 15th. And nobody left that day expecting that they would not be going into work for, I guess, over a year. And so some of those, I think managers were really confused initially in terms of how do I do this? And they kept just managing the way that they had before. But I think what I've seen in the last few years coming out of the pandemic is that a lot of managers struggle with how to manage remote employees. And even prior to the pandemic, we would have employees who at various times would work from home. And a lot of managers struggle with that because they want to see the task and they want to see what people are doing so that they can put an eye on it and be able to critique and coach, etc. Whereas when the employees are at home, they can't see any of that. So I think it had to go less to the tactics of a job and more to outcome-based managing, where you understand the results that the employee needs to get. You try to provide them the tools that they need in order to do that. And then you have just great communication, frequent check-ins. And the other thing that they were balancing that I think is a remnant of that is kind of evaluating the mental wellness of employees and where they are and how they're feeling, because a lot of that changed after the pandemic. So the empathy has to increase. They have to get a lot more familiar with the digital tools. And they still do the performance management, but probably a little bit differently because for remote employees, they aren't seeing what the employee is doing every day. So they have to be really good at their time management and making sure that they understand how to manage in an outcome-based way instead of I see what's going on and I can tell when you're not doing great, or I can get feedback from another employee who's seeing your work who maybe noticed that there was an error, etc. So just a lot of flexibility and empathy more so probably than they've ever had to display.
Yes, yes. Um, with that in mind, what is your take on the recent announcement from Amazon? Because that caught me by surprise. What surprised me was how cutthroat it was, and how black and white it was. There was no negotiation. It was everybody's back in the office in January 2025 period. It seems like there will be no room for negotiation. And I think if there is room for negotiation, I think it can be even worse in terms of how it will affect the culture of the place and how it's perceived by employees that are allowed or are not allowed to stay home. What is your take? Why are employers so reluctant in adopting hybrid or remote work?
Well, a lot of my perspective comes from the large financial institutions. And so it wasn't a surprise
Mhm.
because when you look behind and see how the sausage is being made, a lot of these companies have had hybrid models coming out of the pandemic and trying to accommodate employees who before they would just come into the office. They may have had personal reasons, maybe they were caring for someone, or a lot of people bought pets, etc., during that time and had that responsibility. There's a lot of things that came up over the pandemic that prior to the pandemic employees would have just come in and they would have found a way to handle those things. And so
Mm.
a lot of these companies, it seems like a quick decision, right, with Amazon, but it probably wasn't. They have probably been experimenting with these different hybrid models for some time and keeping track of what's working and what's not. And some of the things I saw when I was still working in corporate America is that a lot of employees want to work from home and work remotely. And there are certain companies and industries where it's harder to do that. If you can imagine a financial institution where someone is working from home, they may have client information up on their computer, and it makes it very hard if they're working from home to ensure the safety of client information. And so, in these highly regulated industries, there are a lot of compliance rules and regs around how data and information is handled. And it's
Yeah.
very hard to manage those things with someone working from home. It's like you don't know who's going to walk in and who's going to see what's on your laptop. And granted, there are industries where that's not as big of an issue. I think the problem comes in when there's a group of employees who want to come in on a regular basis and they feel like they've done that all these years and that's what makes sense to them. And then the disparity comes in with those people who want to work from home. And then it becomes the haves and have nots. Well, I'm coming in every day. Why shouldn't I be rewarded because I'm coming in 5 days a week? And then there's other things, right, around the collaboration, and especially with emerging employees coming out of college, and they really need that mentorship and they need to be in the environment in order to learn quickly about how to do their job. That becomes very hard if their manager is working home, or if those folks are working home. They're coming out of college and they are not really learning the office politics and how do they learn quickly and who to go to for what. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying I'm on one side or the other, but I saw the trend a long time ago. I thought that financial services would have everybody back in the office. A lot of the big companies are saying come in 3 days a week, and they're tracking it. What I haven't seen
Mm.
is the consequence model of that. Like if you ask someone to come in 3 days a week and say you have to be in three, and there's a pattern of them not doing it, I don't know that companies have figured out, well, if you do that 3 times, then you're going to get terminated. I think the consequences of it they
Mm.
struggle with. And I think I read somewhere there was even a lawsuit where someone got terminated because they didn't come in, and then there was a big lawsuit, et cetera. So I guess what I'm saying is it's really complicated for companies to figure out how to do it for some and not others. And then when you think of these big companies, some of the largest banks in the world I've worked for, and of course they have a presence in lots of communities. And if these people aren't coming into work, then the communities are suffering because people aren't going out to eat lunch. They're not frequenting the businesses around where, in my case, the headquarters. There's just lots of different considerations that go into it. One of which is how the employee
Yeah.
feels about it. But let's be clear, these are big companies and their business is to make money and provide shareholder value. So the wants and needs of the employees may not be at the top of the list always. And
Yeah.
what we've seen is that employees sometimes vote with their feet and they will find a place that can accommodate that. But it almost feels like the work environment is trying to get back to what's normal, if it's even normal. And what
Mm.
we knew to be normal was going into the office and I've worked in financial services, so it's all about face time. I started out in corporate and investment banking, and it was all
Yeah.
about face time. Um, but I have to be
Yeah.
honest, I've worked from home maybe 3 or 4 years, and I never even thought I could be productive from home, but I'm like, I am super productive from home. So we all have those
That's true.
feelings about it, right? But it's very
Yeah.
complicated. It's way more complicated than we imagine.
Yes. Now that you left the corporate world and you are in recruitment, are you finding that your candidates seek the hybrid and remote more than they seek, 100% of the time in the office?
Yes. It is
Yeah.
clear from what I've seen that job seekers would prefer to work from home and have a lot more flexible options. Because I think one thing that was discovered while a lot of people were working from home is that they prefer more of a balance, and they
Mm.
enjoy home life, and they and I'm not saying this is for everyone, but I think the pattern is that maybe I don't want to work myself to the point where I'm ill. I want to enjoy life and
Mm.
not have work be everything, but it's a means to an end so that I can enjoy those things that are most important to me, which might be family and friends, etc.
And Linda, what I have found as a coach is that it's not so much the work that was burning them out. Many times it was just the commute. It was just the back and forth, In some cities in the US, that could mean over an hour each way to go to work and come back. In Melbourne, where I am in Australia, I have a friend who travels 1 hour and a half each way to go to work every day. And that is a lot. So if she can find, or anyone can find, a job where you don't have to spend that much time commuting, then of course I think that they will choose that. I'm not even sure if it's really the work from home. I have a feeling anecdotally with my clients that it's really the commute that really kills it for them.
The commute is certainly a factor, and a lot of times you see that being the biggest factor because many of the
Mm.
places where we live, they're becoming more congested, and so it takes a long time. I mean, I was working downtown Charlotte, and it would take, which is maybe, I don't know, maybe 15 miles. I mean, it could take an hour to get there
Mm.
and to get back. But then you factor all the other things that go with it, right? It's the commute. It's wow, you got to do all this dry cleaning. You got to keep stuff straight. There's a
Yeah.
confluence of things that come to bear when you have to go into an
Mm.
office, paying for parking and all of that. And people got a sense of what it was to not have all of that. And so I
Mhm.
think companies, um, I think they will make some movement toward trying to make it easier for employees. Um, but I think they will only go so far, right? And then Again, I
Mm,
think they will always try to get back to what is normal, considered normal for business. But I think companies
mhm.
have come a long way in terms of trying to listen to the prevailing voices of their employees and make some concessions around that. What I've
Yeah.
seen a lot is companies beefing up their wellness programs, et cetera, and doing things around benefits, et cetera, that might entice employees and make them, feel better about being in the workplace again. But I have to say, I just don't think it certainly hasn't gotten back to where it was, and I'm not sure it ever will.
And Linda, tell me about empathy in leadership. I want to explore that a little bit more with you because it's almost like um, before before these sort of past few years, empathy and leadership were antagonizing each other. Like you wouldn't put those two together until recently. I have a strengths assessment test that I do for my clients, and it shows a talent wheel with all of their talents. And you have leadership here, and you have understanding others, which is the empathy part of the assessment there. And when my senior executives rank well in understanding others and not so well in leadership, they get really upset about it. But, I think that leadership as a traditional trait is not necessarily what you need to have at the top of the ladder anymore. I think that there are other traits in the people's talents wheel that can um, replace or work to support their position of leadership, even if they don't have a leadership trait. So I'm interested in your interest in empathy. Where did you start thinking about empathy in leadership?
Oh, wow. I think for me personally, I think
Mhm.
my sense of empathy came from the way that I was raised. I had a, a mother and a father. My mother finished high school. My father did not. Um, and my father taught me to put myself in other people's shoes. And so, one way I put that into action is when I've been in corporate America. I've interfaced with CEOs and very senior level people. And so, and I started out in corporate and investment banking. So when you see these bastions of power, you sometimes it's hard not to emulate them. And in financial institutions, it's about being tough and having sharp elbows and getting things done. And so to be in those environments, you can very easily say, oh, well, the way that I can be successful is to be just like those guys and just be hard and unsympathetic and just get the work done and expect people to fall in line. Um, but what I noticed, I mean, for myself, I said, I noticed early on, I'm pretty self aware, that I want to be
Mhm.
as respectful and engaging with the janitor as I am with the CEO. If the CEO walks by, I want to be respectful and say hello, but also the people that are cleaning the buildings that we are going into. They have a job, and their job is just as important to them. And so I've always just made it a point to um, treat the people who have no power the same way that I treat people with power. But going back to your statement around leaders that might be high on empathy, but maybe not so high in terms of their leadership characteristics. I've seen a lot in HR with leaders where they're empathetic. They can put themselves in other people's shoes, but they want to solve the problem. And in some cases, they can't solve the issue that the person has. So empathy doesn't mean
Yeah.
you have to solve. It means that you need to show that you understand the perspective and the experience that people are coming from, because you can't solve everything to their liking.
Mm.
But if you're self-aware enough and aware enough of other people to understand why they believe what they believe and understand what they want and why, half the time it's just understanding that you or showing that you understand that. And sometimes they don't even care if you solve the problem or make their situation different. Sometimes people just want to be heard and know that you understand how they feel. And so I think one of the most important characteristics of a leader is that self-awareness, to know themselves and how their emotions feed into how they lead and how they interact with people, but also being aware enough to know who you're dealing with and why and what's important to them.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's
so
where
interesting you mentioned. Okay, it's so interesting you mentioned this spillover effect of empathy, where the empathetic person is trying to fix everyone and fix everything. When we're doing this assessment, that is one of the limiting behaviors of understanding others. So the self-awareness comes from the fact, like you said, you're absolutely right, that you know you're good at understanding others and you're good at listening and active listening and providing the support. But you cross a line when you start to fix everything, when you haven't been asked to, especially. And that can also burn you out. And we call that, in the Talent Predicts assessment, we call that limiting behavior. So when your strength becomes your weakness, right? So you follow that strength, and it has a crescendo and you get better and better at it. But if you do it too much, then it doesn't work and you fall off the wagon by using your strength too much, which is different from having a weakness. Right. So a weakness would be not being able to understand anybody and, being quite blasé about other people's problems. So that would be a weakness, but your strength can actually be your undoing as well. So I'm glad that you brought it up. Do you find that?
I'm sorry. Another
Go ahead.
instance where I've seen that from an HR standpoint is it's a little different, but it's with managers. Managers hear something from an employee and they want to show that they're a good manager. And so they're like, well, for example, I'm going to give you some extra days off so you can go handle that. I know you're going through a rough time. And the issue comes in is that they do it for that person, but someone else comes up with a similar issue and they don't do it. So it creates risk. And so it's a takeoff on empathy. But sometimes when employees kind of bend the rules for employees, they actually create more risk because now you got another employee saying, well, you did it for them. Why didn't you do it for me? And I see that way more often. I've seen that a lot more often than the empathy piece, but I see that a lot in the middle management level.
Yeah. Now I'm interested in that perception, in that sort of perspective that you have from having worked in the corporate world up until recently and now being a recruiter. And I know we haven't prepped for this question, but have you had any aha moments since joining recruitment and you're like, oh, that's why recruiters do this, or that's why recruiters have asked me this in the past? Because I think it's such an interesting insight that you could provide the audience now that you are in recruitment, having been in the corporate world. I would love to hear more aha moments from you.
Wow, that is such a great question, and I've even thought about that. One thing that's really surprised me is, throughout my time in corporate America, I certainly had recruiters reach out to me from some of the largest retained search firms to the contingency firms, et cetera. And I have not done a lot of applying for jobs, but I've heard a lot of information around people saying that I don't hear back. It's like I got these great skills, and it just doesn't seem like um, it doesn't seem like they are looking at my skills and using me appropriately and presenting me to the right places and people. And then when I get in recruiting specifically, and I come in it thinking that it's such a personal business, and that the job is to really help everybody and help them find the job that they want based on the skill set that they have. But it's a lot more impersonal than I thought. I mean, when you think of retained search firms, it's really about their clients and satisfying their clients. So that leads to a very impersonal relationship, i.e., if I look at your background and you don't have the kind of background that could help my client, then I hate to say it, but you become of less value in this process to me. And I think a lot of people searching for jobs go into this thinking, wow, I have an advocate who's actually going to help me find the best job. And the lesson is that even when you're in the process and working, you still have to be your biggest advocate, and you still have to keep the wheels turning. And I think a lot of people come into the process thinking that they're going to be shepherded, and they're going to be shown, and they're going to be presented as the perfect candidate. But it's not that, and it's not set up to be that. Because you can't spend a lot of time on, if you're a recruiter, you can't spend a lot of time on someone that you may not be able to place into a job that you have an order for. And so even all of my time in HR, I thought that I would have had a better understanding of that and how it works. And so it took me getting into it to understand that it's a business, and it has to make money. And I think a lot of candidates feel like it should be a lot more personal and personalized for them. So
Yes,
that's
I think it's really I think it's really a pity that the candidates don't actually know this, because I think the knowledge is power, and knowledge would make life so much easier for hundreds of thousands of candidates that apply for jobs and don't hear back. And if they just know that that's how the recruitment business operates, then they would feel less that that is a personal issue. Like, they
totally agree.
would feel that, yeah. And frankly, that's the reason why I coach. I always felt as a job seeker that it was a very lonely place to be, that there wasn't anybody in my corner. I was very lucky that I always worked with great recruiters, but I knew in my heart that even though they liked me as a candidate, that meant very little in terms of the decision making at the end of the recruitment process. The hiring manager and the panel had the power and so forth. So yes, you're right. I think that if people here listening have listened to other recruiters on this podcast in the past, what you've just said is exactly what I've heard in the past from captains of industry in recruitment, people that have been in recruitment for decades and decades, and they all came into recruitment because they love people and because they want to help people. And then they realize that, it's much more complicated than that.
Another aha. Could I talk about another aha?
Please.
In terms of candidates seeking roles, I am sometimes surprised by how little preparation they come into the process. And when you think about all of the tools and technology and coaches, et cetera, that are out there that could help them be their best selves in this process, I mean, when you think about how much time they actually spend getting themselves ready for this process, i.e., I mean, and I have kids and I'm always coaching them around, let me do mock interviews with you. And they're like, no, I'm good. And I'm like, no, really, until you see yourself on camera, you're not good. And so what I'm saying is there are so many tools out there. I mean, if you have an iPhone, you can push record and answer questions, and you can hear your inflection points, how you answer the questions, how you look when you're answering the questions. And most people don't do that. We got AI, Chat GPT, Copilot, all these things now that can come up with questions. And my aha is, wow, people should use the tools that are out there to come to this process prepared, because it could be the slightest thing that gives someone else the edge over a candidate. And why not be your best self if you have the tools in order to get yourself there? And so that was a big aha. I just thought people came and they were like, had everything together, and they had practiced, and they've asked the right questions to understand more about the role that they're interviewing for, and even the company, because there's unlimited information out there. So I think that's one opportunity that job seekers could focus on that might help their outcome.
You're absolutely right, Linda. I think I know why that happens. And it's kind of a convoluted solution for this issue that I came up with, but I think I'm right. But I'll share it with you now and with the audience. There are two psychologists that won the Nobel Prize a few decades ago because they found out that human beings are terrible at assessing their chances, terrible at probability, and they're just not good at that. And the lack of visibility that you have when you are a solo job seeker looking for a role, you don't see the other candidates. You don't know how many candidates are being interviewed, right? So when you get the interview, you think you got the job. That's what they think, right? And when I tell them, if you got the interview and there are 4 others, you have a 20% chance. If you got the interview and there are 3 others, you have 33%. That's not much. Even if there's one other person, you have 50% chance. They freak out a little bit. They haven't thought of that before. I kid you not. When I tell them the percentages, they do freak out a little bit. And I think that is the reason why they don't do the preparation that they need to, is because when they get the interview, and also because recruiters want to present the best possible candidates to their clients. So what they do is they pump you up. They make you so excited about it. How great you are. This is how you should present yourself. So they give all this information. And then I get clients that have gone through a few rounds of those things and didn't get jobs. And they say, but the recruiter really liked me. That's what they say to me. Like, of course the recruiter liked you. Otherwise you wouldn't have been selected. You wouldn't be in the top 5, 4, 3, 2. They liked you, but that doesn't mean you got the job, right? So that inability to make assessments is really, it's human nature. It's something that we need to remind ourselves and remember that the interview is not yet the job.
And put less weight on if the recruiter likes me. I mean, the recruiters do great jobs of sorting people out. But the real question should come around, who am I going to be interviewing with at the company, and what can you tell me about them? Because they ultimately are the ones who make the decision. And there's a lot of questions that they can ask. They may or may not get an answer, but what I find is that candidates sometimes won't even ask those questions to get better clarity around what they're going into. And sometimes they do, and recruiters make sure that their candidates are prepared. But I'm generally shocked at the questions that they don't ask.
Yeah, that's a good point. Linda, you've joined recruitment during an interesting time. How is it going in the US in 2024 for recruitment companies? Because in Australia and here in the UK, the market is really slow. So there aren't that many jobs advertised in 2024 compared to 2023. I have a feeling in the US is the same. Is that what you're finding in your firm?
It is the same, and I have friends and colleagues in the business, some of which have their own companies, et cetera, and they've said the same thing, that it's tougher.
Mhm.
And we've, been in this weird thing of, it being an election year, which is over now, and lots of stuff going on in the market that causes companies, I think, to be a little cautious about how much they're spending. I mean, I think most of these companies are doing great, but they
Mhm.
like to be prepared for the unknown. And so it's the
Mm.
typical thing that happens around third and fourth quarter where um, they start reducing. I mean, there's been a lot of middle management layoffs in the US
Yeah.
with and across many different industries, but it feels like it's something different in terms of something that's pivoting or changing in terms of middle management. And I'm sure digital technology, AI, and some of that stuff is probably having an impact, and some of it's just the run of the mill efficiency plays and expense reduction plays that companies go through. But it does feel a little differently, but it's a cycle because I've seen it before in financial services. It's a cycle,
Yes. Yeah.
and a cycle, I usually give cycles about 7 years because that used to be the financial services kind of cycle. When you see something, it's going to be there for 7 years. And I don't know how long this is going to
Mhm.
last, but the wild card is AI and how that's going to change how people do their jobs. But yeah,
Mhm.
there's been a lot of reductions um, in companies,
Yes. Now,
technology and financial
now,
services. Yeah.
now that the elections are over, Linda, and we know the outcome, what are you in your firm sort of forecasting for 2025 in terms of, you mentioned middle management, in terms of jobs that you might see being more popular next year, or are you prepare, how are you preparing for that first quarter of 2025?
I don't know that the election makes a difference here, but it might. But I think, the
Mm,
same theme around technology and becoming more digitally savvy as it relates to AI, and how do you use all these tools that actually help you to do your job better? And how do you
mm,
stop being scared that those tools are going to take your job? And how do you make yourself more ready for whatever comes? Because people are predicting. I mean, even some of these big companies that are so entrenched in AI, they really don't know exactly how it's going to change things. We just know that it's going to change
mm,
things. And so some of the stuff that I've been doing, I have been taking AI courses. I mean, primarily free on YouTube because there's so many experts out there, and a lot of good information. And I think, for some people that may not be their thing, but and I don't work in technology, but I want to have the knowledge of what's going on around me. And I think that's
I agree.
good to do so that you at least see
Mm,
the trends that are coming, whether or not you can prepare yourself to be ready for those trends personally. You need to know what's going on in that space because it will have a big impact. And even if you're not looking at the big stuff, the small stuff around, do you know how to use Chat GPT? Do you know how to get information that helps you to do your job? Do you know which apps help you to do things so much faster? How do you work better, faster, and not harder? So I think we just, I don't know that we're looking at it and saying, oh, wow, we need to only be taking on those jobs, those technology jobs. But we are starting to see companies want candidates to have knowledge of AI. They don't have to have done much in
Mm,
it, but they need to have knowledge of it. We are starting to see that. So
mm.
for people out there looking,
Yes.
those are some things they can be learning more about.
Yeah. I have a friend and he works in AI in Australia, and he asked a job candidate that was interviewing for a job he advertised. Did you use AI to do your resume and your cover letter? And then he told me the correct answer would have been yes, because I want people to use AI. I don't want people to pretend that they haven't used it. I want people to know how to use AI well to help them do their work better. So the other thing that I found out recently, one of my clients sent me an article that was published by the Times. I'll see if I can put a link below for those who are interested, saying that recruiters are now advising and recommending that job seekers use ChatGPT and other AI tools to write their resumes and cover letters, because if they don't, there's a discrepancy in the quality of the applications. However, as a coach, I instruct my clients on how to do that in a way that's still authentic to them and well written and not vanilla and sounding like every other application out there. So I think that it's important to learn how to use AI to your advantage and not to take away your humanity, if that makes sense.
Oh no, I totally agree with that, because I do see some resumes, and it can be chock full of stuff, and I can still come out of it and say, I
Mm.
don't know what this person does. So it looks like it was written by AI and it sounds perfect. And so I think
Mhm.
that I haven't thought of this, but I think that's something that recruiters need to be aware of, because I think it will require asking better questions to understand what people have
Yeah.
really done versus what ChatGPT is saying they've done. Um,
Mhm.
so I
Yeah,
think it's going to change. I mean, some
you're right.
companies are doing interviews and they'll interview a candidate, and then AI will rate the interview, and they'll pick up facial cues, etc. So I think it's important
Mm.
to understand that. And also with these applicant tracking systems, I mean, why not use AI to make your resume such that the tracking system will pick up on keywords that might be better for you when recruiters are going on into LinkedIn search and
Mm.
searching for certain things. Um, so it
Yes,
definitely makes sense to be
yes,
aware and knowledgeable.
yes. And Linda, you're absolutely right. And I think that whatever ChatGPT spits out looks perfect because there are linguistics and masters of education and all of these amazing people feeding artificial intelligence with great methods and narratives and storytelling techniques. But if you as a user don't provide enough input into your ChatGPT tab, the output will sound basic. It's just the basic formatting that comes out right, but there's no meat to it. So that's why you read it and you can't figure out what the person does. So my advice to the audience listening to this is that you need to input a lot of stuff into ChatGPT from you, from your original resume drafts, your thinking, your ideas, for it to spit out something that sounds like you and tells people what you do. So I think it's that lack of input and knowledge of how to add information into ChatGPT. And people are very wary about how to ask ChatGPT. Just go for it, everybody. Just go test, use it, use it. The more you use it, the better it is at understanding you, because it's now learning from your tabs. By the time you listen to this episode, things will be even more different. But by the time of recording this, ChatGPT is now learning from each of your tabs that you use. So the more you use it, the better, and the better it will capture your voice. I think that's what's
Yes.
important.
And then the next step,
But I once had a client that asked ChatGPT to write his resume as if he was Simon Sinek. So he wanted to have that voice. And I'm like, no, you can't do that.
have your
It's
voice.
not you.
And I'm sure you help clients with this, but the next step is, even if, you get the resume and you get the interview, there are, lots of tools that can help you interview better. And I advise people to go back to the basics and just look at your resume and do a forensic review of it and make sure that you know what you've done. And not only know what you've done, but what is the skill or competency that what you did displays? And can you talk about it if someone asks you 5 different questions about the same experience? Because that's another thing you see, is that the answers, how they describe what they've done and why that should be important to an employer, sometimes is a hard thing for them to do, because they're not used to talking to themselves about themselves, I guess. And people don't spend enough time getting themselves ready for something that's so important. Imagine how much time we spend on other things, and this thing that's so important, who we are and what we've done, we spend so little time pulling that information together. And so, and there's lots of tools out there to help with that as well. So that's where we can get.
Yep. Yes, Linda, it was an absolute pleasure talking to you. We went off course a little bit, but I think that the conversation is very important. This episode is going out early in the year, or even late 2024. I'm not sure yet, but it will be such a breath of fresh air and inspiring for professionals that are looking for work in 2025. So thank you so much for reaching out, for coming on board and sharing your knowledge with us. Is there any sort of links or information about you that you want to share with the listeners before we go?
I don't
Maybe
have any
I
link.
can add the link to your company.
I can give you a link to CTE. I'm happy to have people reach out to me, because I've been in HR for so long. The coaching part of me comes out when I'm working with candidates, and it's, I just want people to stay optimistic about 2025, that I think things will get better. Be flexible and understand that it's a marathon, and that if they need to change their goal, then change it, but stay in it. And you can't control the job market, but you can control your attitude and how much time you put into yourself in the process.
Yeah, right. Yes, that's wonderful advice, Linda. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.